Hello everyone, it's your friend Phil here, project management trainer and coach. I hope you're doing awesome today. Today we're going to be talking about the 49 process mnemonics, and we're going to be covering the area of scope. This is going to be part 2 in a series, and we'll see where we end up with this, but the intent is to keep going until we really know these mnemonics really well and we can draw out that page 25 in the PMBOK guide. For those of you who don't know me, I've been working as a project manager for going to 2 decades now, training project management for over a decade. The moment I got spat out of the PMP exam alive, I decided I was going to help anyone and everyone who needed to get certified. So since 2005, the day after I got out of the exam, my head's been buzzing about how am I going to help people? How am I going to make sure that people don't fall into the trap I fell into? And that's why I put out a lot of these videos. We have a website out there. It's Praizion.com. We offer training to people getting ready for the PMP exam. So if you're getting ready for the exam, just hit that page and you'll find all sorts of solutions, training aids, ideas that will help boot you into shape so that you don't fall victim to what I almost fell victim to. I mean, it was a very, very difficult exam. I tell you, I spent the first 1 hour taking 20 questions down, or trying to take the first 20 questions down. And it was honestly like a bloodbath. It was terrible. It was awful. And then I decided I was going to jump to the end of the exam and do it from the back to front. And honestly, that is really what saved me on the test, because if I had kept trying to plow down from 21 to 50, I mean, it would have been curtains. So in preparing for this exam, I want to encourage you to think smart, be agile. You got to be nimble. You got to be thinking on your feet. What am I going to do? And this course that we present to you on Praizion.com will help you do just that. All right. So jump on a bandwagon and come study with us. It will be a pleasure to have you. We've trained all sorts of firms worldwide, many on the screen you might know, government agencies like NASA and the FBI and so on. So we're going to be taking a look at page 25 today. Page 25, that page that we all love to hate, or we hate to love. And a lot of folks say, Phil, there's no way I'm going to get this stuff into my head. Some people say, hey, Phil, I've got learning problems that prohibit me from studying this stuff the way everyone else does. Well, I'm hoping that by the time I get done today, the stuff that I'm going to show you will help you to better remember what these processes are. I'm going to break it down in the area of scope. I'm going to make it very, very simple. Okay. Now, I would advise you, if you're studying for the exam, you might just want to tackle this piecemeal. First of all, break it down by process group. Okay. So you've got the 2, 24, 10, 12, 1 configuration. 2 processes in initiating, 24 in planning, 10 in executing, 12 in monitoring and controlling, 1 in closing. All right, so get that down, and at least remember, majority of the processes are in planning. Okay, that's the biggest part of it, knowing the distribution, and then you can begin to attack these one by one. All right, that is really what you want to focus on. How many do I have here? How many do I have here? How many do I have here? And then when it gets to the individual knowledge areas, we also have a configuration for that as well, which is 766 436 3734. So there's 7 in integration. I covered that last time, and today we're covering the next number, 6. So we've done 7 and now we're doing 6. And 7, do you remember what that was? David dances delightfully most mornings or most Mondays, playing chords, chords on his harp. So that was the first video. This one, we're tackling another royalty person. You're gonna love this one. You ever been to Buckingham Palace? Or nearby, you might have seen this character that I'm about to show you. And great guy, jovial with the press on most occasions. But did you know he's got some dance moves? I'm talking about Prince Charles. He's got some dance moves. So here he is doing his thing. So here's the scope mnemonic for today, folks. And can you guess which music he's dancing to? You ever heard of calypso? Ah, we're going to put that into the mix. So, Prince Charles dances calypso. Did you know that? Check out his dance moves. He dances calypso very confidently. He looks confident in that picture, right? Prince Charles dances calypso very confidently. Now, what does this map back to in the world of scope? Plan scope management is the first one. That's the Prince. Collect requirements is the C for Charles. And D for dances stands for define. Define the scope. Can you guess what the other one is? The next C, calypso. Well, creating the WBS is kind of like a calypso game if you do it well with a team. You're moving around quite frequently, and hey, just get that into your head. So, calypso is create WBS, okay? And the next one is validate. Validate scope. And last but not least, confidently, is control scope. So what do all these mean? Let's break it down and talk about what these really mean one by one. So let's start off with plan scope management. What is plan scope management all about? Now, for people who have not been down this path of scoping out a project, I want you to think about the importance of mapping out what you will do to get your scope under control, to make sure that people aren't just adding extras at random. So the question is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to control your scope? There are many things you could do. You could collect requirements, and then you can define scope. You see where I'm going? So plan scope management is where you decide which of these scope processes you are actually going to be carrying out. And this is where you decide what the various artifacts of scope will look like. This is where you plan out how far you would go in the world of scope. Let's take a quick journey to the book. I don't mean to belabor this particular area, but I know a lot of people don't open the mothership. All right, so we're going to open the mothership. Is that all right? Can we just do that? Let's open the mothership and let's find out what exactly is in here in the book. You know, I'm very fond of opening the mothership, especially when in doubt. I call the PMBOK guy the mothership because all the books, all the PMP prep books, they all quote it. So why don't we just read it, all right? It says here on page 134, it says, plan scope management is the process of creating a scope management plan that documents how the project and product scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. How are we going to define this scope? How are we going to get a handle of what we're supposed to do? How are we going to make sure that the customer buys into it? What measures and what process will we use for that? And how do we prevent gold plating and extras? You need to sit down and plan it out. Some projects are more prone to gold plating than others. It says the key benefit of this process is that it provides guidance and direction on how scope will be managed throughout the project. That's the key thing, folks. How are we going to manage scope? How are we going to make sure that people aren't doing crazy things, adding scope? You know, like a project I was on, there was this character who would come to the meetings and the client would say, can you do this? And he wouldn't even miss a beat. Yes, we can do that in a day. No, you can't do that in a day. Sit down, you clown. What are you talking about? You haven't even counted the cost. So you have people like that, and you know they need to be kept in check. So in plan scope management, this is where you decide this is how scope will be managed to prevent gold plating. That's how it is, to prevent extras and to ensure that we're doing what we need to be doing. All right, so that's the mindset for plan scope management. All right, next one here is collect requirements. think about this as an elicitation of requirements. You don't want to think about this like you are being the collections agent, but rather you want to think about this as though you are collaborating with the people who are giving you the requirements. So rather than think about it as a collection agent going to doors and terrorizing people and, you know, give me what you owe me. You need to think about this as a collaboration. All right, so it's a collaboration, collaborative effort, and that's what collect requirements is all about. All right, the next one here is define scope. Define scope is a bit of a tricky process, especially for those who are coming off the heels of the 5th edition, because the 5th edition attacks this by speaking about inclusions, exclusions, constraints, and assumptions. But what I don't want you to forget in the 6th edition, in this one right here, is that we document and catalog assumptions and constraints in the assumptions log, which is done in the develop project charter process. So if you don't get that straight, you're going to be in trouble, because you're going to think, oh, we do this in defined scope. No. Assumptions and constraints are documented throughout in the assumptions log. All right, so if you haven't taken notice of that, please do. I did communicate not too long ago something I found in the guide that I felt the PMI needed to change. And they did agree that yes, that needed to be updated. And it's something to the effect of the scope statement, the project scope statement, not containing those assumptions and constraints. So that's big. Anyway, you can go read it up, but anyway you see anything out of line with what I'm saying, you know that it's probably coming on the next errata. So bear that in mind. But defined scope is where you are creating the project scope statement. And the project scope statement, it defines quite a lot of stuff, but definitely not the inclusions and exclusions as we used to attribute that responsibility to that document. It's not the case anymore. If you go to page 155 in the mothership, take a look at that page, and you can see they're trying to show you the difference between the project charter and the project scope statement. When you hone in on the project scope statement, it states project scope description, which is progressively elaborated, project deliverables, acceptance criteria, and project exclusions. So you can see that here we don't have that specific mention as we did in the 5th edition of constraints and assumptions. Now in this process though, we could go through the constraints and assumptions to ensure that we have accounted for those in the scope. You want to make sure that the scope considerations does include your review of the constraints and assumptions. All right, so that is an important one to be aware of, and that is define scope. Next one here, create WBS, needs no introduction. This is creating the work breakdown structure. Like I said, don't do this alone at home, project manager. This should be a team effort. This is what you want your team to be participating in with you. Create WBS. Next one is validate scope. This is where your customer, your sponsor, whoever that responsible stakeholder is, this is where they review that final deliverable. They inspect it. Inspection is a tool and technique of validate scope, and ultimately you want an accepted deliverable. That is the output of validate scope that everybody wants for their project. And the next one here, the last one, last but not least, the C stands for control scope. And like I said, this is where you're trying to prevent gold plating. You know, because if you gave some people an inch, they take a mile, like that guy told you about. We can do that in a day. No need for any additional money. Don't worry. That's someone suffering from the Superman syndrome. So we don't want that to happen. And scope just needs to be controlled. We need to make sure people aren't adding extras. People aren't just throwing stuff into the backlog at random, or people aren't just throwing stuff into the requirements log, or to keep it straight, the requirements traceability matrix. All right. So that is exactly what we're doing in scope management. And if we take a look at the weighting of this process, quite straightforward. In planning, we got 24, and 24% of the exam is from planning. So if you just divvy it up 1% for each of these scope processes that falls within planning, we get 1 in plan scope management, 1 in collect requirements, and 1 in define scope. Create WBS is also in planning, so we get 1 for that as well. That's already 4. Now this jumps clear into the controlling domain, and in monitoring and controlling we've got 2. If you do the math, each one is roughly 2+%. So we're going to have 2 for validate scope and 2 for control scope. If we just divvy it up like that, in all fairness and honesty, we're going to end up getting a total weight of 8%. Now someone will say, but Phil, that's very low. That's low for scope. And I do agree, it looks a little bit low, but don't forget, there could be overlap with many of these areas on the exam. Something could be predominantly schedule but involve scope, or predominantly cost and still involve scope, and so on and so forth. So keep that in mind. This is just a very, straight up calculation by divvying the points across, and I know it doesn't always look like this, but I'm showing you this to give you the opportunity to compare and contrast with the other knowledge areas. So we took a look at integration, the other video, the first video. Taking a look at integration, I concluded that 25% of your integration, 25% of your exam could come from integration, and that's at stake on the actual test. So if I were you, I would focus on the big ticket items here. Obviously, validate scope is big. Control scope, I wouldn't imagine it to be bigger than validate scope, maybe in that equal proportion on the test. But if you understand the logic, the mindset, the dogma behind scope management, you'll do well. Here's the philosophy of scope management. We need some guidance in identifying what needs to be done. How do you truly know all that needs to be done on a project? By guessing? No. There has to be some intentionality. And the intentionality is targeting how you're going to unravel what needs to be done. How are you really going to know that you have hit the mark and you have all of those requirements down? There has to be a method to the madness. So this is where in the very beginning you define the how, and then you do whatever you said you would, and then you're going to go back in control scope and say, is this really working? Are we really getting our scope identified in each phase? Are we really getting our scope under the microscope? No pun intended. Let's take a look here, because I want you to be aware of the CTTs, okay? Because Agile has begun to rear its lovely head on the exam, and you guys just need to be ready. So it's my job to tell you what's coming down the pike and how you handle it. That's why I'm your friend, not your fiend. Hopefully. Maybe to some people I am. Maybe some people have nightmares. That Phil, I don't want to hear him, because he makes me scared of the exam. Someone said whenever they turn on the channel, they get scared of the exam. What are you scared about? Would you rather go in there blind and then discover all this stuff I'm telling you? I mean, the exam is a wild exam. It needs to be controlled and managed, and we need to strategize for it. All right, let's take a look at page 133. This is where I want you to focus as far as this Agile discussion is concerned. It says here, in projects with evolving requirements, high risk or significant uncertainty, The scope is often not understood at the beginning of the project, or it evolves during the project. You see that? Scope is not understood, or it evolves. And it says, agile methods deliberately spend less time trying to define and agree on scope in the early stage of the project and spend more time establishing the process for its ongoing discovery and refinement. That is a huge change in mindset. One mindset is we need to lock down this puppy as solidly and quickly as possible. The other mindset says we need to adapt to change that is necessary, change for the better. It's an agile mindset. It says many environments with emerging requirements find that there is often a gap between the real business requirements and the business requirements that were originally stated. Why? Because these business requirements are fluid and dynamic and changing every single minute of the day, like it or not. So PMI is trying to sensitize you to the fact that scope is not always locked down mercilessly. It can change. It says, therefore, agile methods purposefully build and review prototypes and release versions in order to refine the requirements. As a result, scope is defined and redefined throughout the project. In agile approaches, the requirements constitute the backlog. So for your exam, just in case you come across any dialogue regarding the backlog, you got to be ready for it. Your release backlog, your product backlog, your sprint backlog, all that stuff, you need to have that down pat, all right? And on our course, we have these agile methods and artifacts talked about. We have 1.5 hours dedicated to nothing but agile. So as you're going into that test, folks, you ain't been for agile training, some marks, I can tell you, are most likely at risk. So anyway, that's pretty much all I have for today, folks. I just wanted to get you into the mindset of agile just a little with relating to scope, and I hope that when you finally jump into that exam, you're going to be able to handle what you see in the world of agile, and I hope you're going to be able to handle what you see in the world of scope in general. Don't forget, if you've got any questions or comments or concerns, you can always send messages on YouTube. If you're watching this on Facebook, you can hit me up with a direct message right there. Just send a message right there or put a comment, and I would be more than happy to get back to you with answers. Don't forget, those of you who are pulling your hair out, you're doing it wrong, buddy. You're doing it real wrong. You know what to do. You need to go to Praizion.com. I keep telling you, do it and save yourself the hassle. So many people saying, Phil, we didn't even know that Praizion was out there. We knew there were videos, but we didn't know there's a course. Well, if you don't know, now you know. Good night, good morning, and see you again later.